Good morning. Welcome to the first meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. I'm Brian Perry, I'm Democratic Services Manager, for those who don't know me. Just to say that before we start the meeting proper, we've got a procedural matter to deal with. The convener, Councillor McCabe, is unable to join us today, so we need to appoint a chair for today's meeting. Normally for Scrutiny Committees, that would be a member from the opposition. In terms of the people that actually joined us in the room today, we have Councillor Aitchison, who unfortunately is unwell and would rather not take the chair this morning, obviously, so who would be in and out, as he's just said. So I'm going to ask for nominations from people who are in the room. We have Councillor Provost Bissett joining us remotely, but we had a discussion beforehand that it would probably more appropriate that it's somebody that's joined us physically who takes the chair. So to that end, I'm going to ask if there's any nominations to take the chair this morning.
I would like to nominate Lorna Binney.
I second it.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Binney's been nominated. Now, normally it's a member of the opposition who takes the chair, but in the circumstances it's appropriate that is a member of the administration who takes the chair for this meeting. So I'll ask Councillor Binney to join me at the top table.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming along to the Scrutiny Committee today in the Town Hall. You will be aware it's a hybrid meeting, and looking at the screen, I can see we have a lot of people actually working from home, which is really good. The meeting itself, I would like full participation. I think that's very, very important. So I'm now going to start the meeting. Start of business, 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We do, Convener, thank you. We've got Councillor McClare, as I intimated at the start of the meeting. We also have apologies from Councillor Brown and Councillor Anslow.
Moving on slightly to declarations of interest. Would any members declare any financial or non-financial interest they have in any item of the business of this meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the business? That none? None. Thank you. We now move on to the minute. The minute of the meeting of the Scrutiny Committee that was held on the 24th of March. It's pages 2 to 16. And it would be helpful if anybody was at that Scrutiny Committee on that date, because we do have a lot of new members who perhaps weren't at that meeting, if they could agree the meeting or not, agree the minute or not.
I think, Convener, looking at that, and on that basis, it's just yourself who was at that meeting, right. So if you're happy to...
Yes, I'm happy to agree those minutes.
And just to double check, the committee are happy to formally agree it's a correct record?
Agreed. Agreed.
Now moving on to the rolling action log, which is pages 7 to 10.
If it helps, Convener, the rolling action log just shows those actions or actions that are going to result in further reports coming back to the Scrutiny Committee in due course. There are a number of reports, as members will see, starting on page 6. Each one has got progress set aside from the various services on where the reports are. There's none outstanding that don't have explanations given, so it's just a case of members going through their own action log. If they want to ask any questions, they can do so, but really it's just for noting.
So if there is any comments or any questions, but you'll probably see, as Brian says, most of it is in progress at the moment, but if anything that stands out that you want to ask a question on, feel free. Councillor Aitchison.
Thank you. It's 596 for children's services. We had the inspection on the 7th of July for the Rannoch Early Learning Centre. Do we know when the report will be up forthcoming after that?
Mr. Naylor, is it possible you could answer that question, please?
Yes, there's been a follow-up and that will be reported within a report that's going to the Education, Children and Young People Executive a week on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Convener.
Councillor Robertson, do you have a question?
Yes, can we get this report before the end of the year? Because it's very important that we can't do our business unless we have these reports.
Yes. Mr. Naylor, is that possible we can get the report by the end of the year?
As I've said, it will be reported a week on Tuesday at the committee.
That's fine, Mr. Naylor, but it's this committee that's asking for a report, the Scrutiny Committee. So we'd like one for the end of the year. Is that possible?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's maybe just worth saying at this point, the next item of business is the local government benchmarking framework. This is a report to do with performance, which means that all members of council have been invited to participate in today's meeting. The Scrutiny Committee will be the ones that take any decisions or follow any actions, but other members of council have joined the committee today. They've joined us online, and of course they're welcome to ask questions to the chair. Thank you.
Marking framework, and the report will be taken by Rebecca MacDonald. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. This is an annual report to Scrutiny looking at the local government benchmarking framework, which is a set of benchmarking performance indicators known shorthand as the LGBF. So the LGBF is a national approach to preparing, comparing and improving the performance of councils in Scotland. It's compiled by the Improvement Service on behalf of Solace. So there's lots of indicators and information in this report. It covers Falkirk Council's LGBF performance from 2020 to 2021. And so it takes us through to the 31st of March 2021. We're obviously in September 2022, but there is typically a year or so lag in results being reported for the LGBF due to the time it takes for each council to submit their data and for the Improvement Service to collate, analyse, calibrate and publish it. So it ultimately shows the comparative performance data for Scottish councils, as I've already mentioned. Important to note that the period covered in this report was impacted by the pandemic, and the LGB results that we have shows the impact of the first year of COVID-19 on local government services. So councils reacted independently to many of the operational challenges faced at that time, and as a result of that, there are some gaps in the data where councils experienced service delivery challenges and had difficulty capturing some of the data that might have been included in this LGBF report. And with these challenges, the data captured is perhaps not representative of the normal results you would expect for normal times, but they are reflective of the operating environment at that time, and to some extent the operating environment that still affects some key service areas as a result of COVID-19. But I guess to give some assurance to the Scrutiny Committee, the Improvement Service is working to improve the consistency for each set of performance measures across councils and is working with the Scottish Government to try and obtain any missing or delayed data where possible. That said, most of the local government benchmarking indicators have now been published, and there's just a small number that remain, and where where possible, they will be published in due course. But I'd like to just say to members that the Falkirk Council results for LGBF are on the council website, and it's on a portal called My Local Council, which is available for general public scrutiny. So that's there. But moving on to the body of the report, there are 4 main parts to reference in the report. Firstly, it's to show what has happened with our own performance between the years of 2019-20 and 2020-21. So what's been the shift in performance between those years? So paragraph 6.3 shows the shift in Falkirk Council's performance, and it tells us that 37% of indicators are improving, 57% of indicators are deteriorating, and 2% of indicators showed no movement. There is a residual remaining 4% of indicators that relate to financial sustainability. Now, they factually report accounting principles to which there's no prescribed direction of travel. So for those financial indicators, we can't say they're better, worse, or the same. They're just factual accounting records that we take note of. And given the circumstances of that first year of the pandemic, it's a difficult comparison to make between an ostensibly normal operating year in 1920 and how things had to work in 2021 to respond to events at that time. That said, there's still some positives recorded in that there was a marked improvement in 37% of our LGBF performance areas. But really at this stage, I'd like to just make members aware that the granular detail of this particular set of results, and indeed the full suite of LGBF results, is in the appendix to the report. So that's available for further scrutiny. So that was a comparison between 1920 and 2021. The second area to draw attention to is how the council's performance looked during 2021 compared with other councils in Scotland. So this is set out in paragraph 6.4, and it shows how our results compared nationally during the first year of the pandemic. So a brief overview of those results tells us that 50% of indicators performed better than the Scottish average. 46% did not perform as well as the Scottish average. 1% performed the same as the Scottish average, and the remaining 3% of results again relate to financial sustainability section, where there's no directional movement as mentioned before. These are factual records. But again, we say to members that the granular detail of these results is in the appendix. And although there's some mixed results in that section against how we performed to the Scottish average, there's a lean to an overall positive position insofar as 50% of our indicators did perform better than the Scottish average and 1% stayed the same. But it's a difficult year to take account of that first year of the pandemic. The third part of the report to reference is twofold. It's an update on what things we're good at, so service areas that rank in the top quartile of Scotland results. And it also gives an update on what we're not so good at, so those service areas which rank in the bottom quartile. So these are set out for review and consideration in paragraph 6.5 to 6.7. And I appreciate that members may wish to ask questions on these, and would invite colleagues from relevant service leads that are here today to be on board to take any of those questions at the end of this report. The fourth area in the report to highlight is how the indicators tie into the forthcoming council plan. The initial thinking for this is set out in paragraph 6.8 and links to the development work underway on the new plan. So many members on the call today will recall that there was an open invitation to attend engagement workshops last week to feed into how the plan could be shaped. Now, from a performance perspective, the plan aims to include a range of LGBF performance indicators, as well as what we'd call local indicators that tie in with the proposed vision in the plan, the proposed priorities, and collectively these performance indicators should help us monitor our performance against the key projects and key actions charted within the new plan. So to do this performance monitoring, it's important to note that alongside the council plan that will be reported to council at the end of September, there will be something that we call a performance management framework. And that update will show the proposed cycle of reporting to members, officers and the public on how we are progressing with the council plan and the associated work within it. So future performance reports with a focus on the indicators in the new council plan will come to scrutiny accordingly. And so, Convener, maybe just to conclude, a few final thoughts. The local government benchmark framework is the best that we have in comparing our performance against other councils. These LGBF results, alongside other key performance measures, have been central to the thoughts that we've had on how we will move performance management forward in the council and channeling that through the proposed council plan. In February this year, council agreed the best value strategic action plan, and that covered a number of themes, including a series of performance-related actions. The new council plan, if approved, would bring these performance actions to life. The groundwork has already been done and will enable a refreshed approach to scrutinising not only future LGBF results, but a range of performance results that will cover the full extent of the proposed new council plan. But I'll end there, Convener, and we'll look to hand over to the Chief Executive. So in the LGBF report, it says that the Chief Executive of Falkirk Council is the chair of the Local Government Benchmarking Framework Board, which leads the overall development of the national framework. So at this point, Convener, I'd like to hand over to the Chief Executive. Thank you for some final thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Rebecca. I don't have a great deal to add, but Rebecca is right to make the point that this is a national approach to preparing, comparing and improving performance, and it is in partnership with the Improvement Service, run by local government and for local government. And whilst it's by no means a perfect system, and there is can be some criticism of it, it's always worth reminding people what came before. What we had before was a significant burden of statutory performance indicators set by the Accounts Commission, many of which were regarded as unhelpful. And indeed, the Accounts Commission has been very supportive in terms of local government taking forward this work to develop its own performance framework. And it is now a key element of the statutory performance reporting framework. I think what's important to emphasise is it's not a simple comparative tool, because there are great variations between councils in terms of scale and geography and deprivation and many other factors. So the phrase we tend to use about it is it's a can opener. It's a way of getting into a discussion and a debate about relative performance, about reasons why particular services are performing less well or better than they might be in other comparable councils. And there is an expectation that councils will focus on those indicators that are most important to them in terms of their corporate priorities. And indeed, that's the approach we're taking forward in our council plan. Over the 11-year period of the LGBF, performance has improved across the system, but both the LGBF board itself and the Accounts Commission have noted that in the context of the financial framework, this is unlikely to continue. So whilst it's really important we continue to compare and challenge ourselves on performance, the broader picture is almost inevitably we will see areas of performance decline in the context of the wider financial position and challenges that we face. What I would say, just from the perspective of the LGBF board, is the aim of the board is to continue to strengthen the LGBF, to evolve it, to ensure it reflects some of the issues and challenges which have become more prominent as a result of the COVID pandemic, issues round about cost of living and poverty and inequality, and also climate change is a relatively new addition to the framework just within the last couple of years. The other areas we're really focused on are trying to improve the speed of reporting, and there's work ongoing on a local government data portal, which would make the gathering and reporting of information much more automatic, and we're looking at the kind of technical integration of various data systems to improve that. And I suppose the final thing is we're trying to build momentum in the use of the framework to transform and improve local government services, promoting good practice and creating opportunities to share practice and learning. So that's all ongoing work, but it is, I think, a very useful tool for local government, and one which, despite its some weaknesses and some frustration sometimes in relation to particularly the timing of data, does provide us with a useful tool in terms of considering our own performance. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrie. Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate your input here and how important it is to, to scrutinise council's performance against the local government benchmarking indicators. Though what I would say before I open up for questions, and I do believe we will probably have quite a lot of questions, and I was pleased to hear, Rebecca, as well, you spoke about consistency. That's what I've noticed as well. With this, there was a lot of data that isn't understanding, like from one council to another, the formula they use to indicate their performance in certain areas. So it's like comparing sometimes apples with oranges. We need that consistency behind that, because then, well, as far as I'm aware, or my knowledge, like if you've got benchmarking and it's not the same formula out there in all these councils, how do you know that we are actually making improvements? We need to know how that benchmarking is done. But I'm really pleased to hear that 37% of indicators are improving. Unfortunately, in this report, 57 are deteriorating. But you did say that this will improve in future, and you're working very hard for improvements for the local government benchmarking framework. So I'm now going to open it up for questions. Provost Bissett, I believe, had his hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Convener. I think Councillor Spears had his hand up first.
Thank you, Provost Bissett. Councillor Spears, would you like to ask the question?
Yeah, firstly, thank you as the administration into it. I think we would miss a great opportunity here while we're looking back over our performance over the last 2 years. It would be amiss if we didn't greatly thank our frontline services, especially our refuse service, our social work service, for some of the outstanding work they carried out under the most difficult of circumstances. And I think the message should go out, especially from elected members here and the Scrutiny Committee, of our grateful thanks to these people on the front line who maintained services throughout the pandemic. There's also outlying bodies we need to thank, especially Falkirk Delivers. I know I was greatly involved in food banks. I would imagine most of the elected members at that time were greatly involved in trying to maintain some sort of a level situation within our communities. So I think we should send a loud and clear message out to all the people who, while others were on lockdown and shielding, were out there on the front line and maintaining a level of service within our district.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spears. I totally agree with you. Do you have any questions on the report at the moment?
I haven't been sent coffee and I didn't realise.
Okay.
But I'm sure that'll be forthcoming out, dependent on the signal.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrie had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I just wanted to pick up on the point about consistency of measurement. I mean, I would say that the consistency of measurement across councils is very high. There are very clear definitions for indicators. There's a lot of work done to ensure that consistency. So I think whilst during the early days of the benchmarking framework there were significant issues around about consistency, I think that is much less of an issue now because of the clarity of definitions and the joint work done between councils. As I say, I think the really important point about comparability is that the councils are very different in terms of their geography, their scale and their levels of deprivation, but I think the measurement issue is one which is dealt with pretty well generally.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrie, for clarifying that point. Thank you. Provost Bissett, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Given that we've been through COVID, I think it's probably going to take at least another year or so to get some proper comparator. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, can you put the microphone off in the room just when you're... Yeah, perfect. It's just the echo. It means we can't hear remotely. Sorry, thank you.
Okay. So it'll probably take at least another year to get a kind of leveling out of these comparators, given that we're coming out of COVID, so it produced its own difficulties. But the first question I'd like to ask is page 14, 6.3, 57%, that's 47 of indicators were shown to be deteriorating. This is significant, especially compared to last year, which sat at 36%. Does this indicate that performance has worsened? And what mitigations are in place to improve performance? Thank you.
Mr. Lawrie, can you answer that question, please?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I mean, in straightforward terms, to answer Councillor Bissett's question, yes, I mean, there are a majority of indicators that have declined in the current, in the year to 2021. I mean, that pattern is not significantly different from other councils. And there are a number of indicators where, because of the challenges of COVID, because of the different way that services were provided, there was almost inevitable that was going to be decline. I suppose that and each of the service directors would have a clearer overview of their own service areas, but I think the value of this is, rather than looking at that kind of overall level, is to go into particular indicators and understand perhaps if they've declined, why they've declined, have they declined both here and in other councils, or is there a reason why a particular indicator has declined in Falkirk, but even though it's improved elsewhere? And it's that kind of level of granularity we begin to understand what the key issues might be for the council. But I suppose my overall comment would be, yes, we have seen a decline that appears to be replicated quite widely across Scotland. That's largely about COVID, but it's also about the increasing financial squeeze. And that's why I made my comment earlier on, my introductory statements, that the Accounts Commission in its National Overview Report for Local Government is predicting that given the financial situation, we are likely to see declines or declining levels of performance. The important thing for the council is to decide which of these indicators are measuring things which are of importance to us and ensure these are the ones where we're focusing our resource and energy and driving improvement. I hope that at least partially addresses your question, Councillor Bissett.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Bissett?
I think that's going to be a similar response for a lot of the questions. My next question is in a similar vein and it'll probably provoke the same response. Page 15, 6.4, 46%, that's 41 indicators perform below the national average, which is significantly greater compared to last year, which sat at 29%. So what is the specific reason behind that? Is it, as you said, is it COVID? Is it financial instability, the challenges we face? Or I wonder if it's the same answer you're going to give me, or Is there something else behind that?
Well, through you, convener, I mean, in a sense, it is the same answer, but I think the importance of it is, again, looking at particular indicators and understanding why they've declined or why performance has reduced relative to the Scottish average. So there are these general factors, that's absolutely correct, but these general factors, of course, impacted on all councils, and there will be specific factors in relation to different services and different indicators where the council's performance has been particularly affected. And even, for example, if you look at the indicators which relate to the use of sport and leisure facilities, average cost of use, etc., where actually historically Falkirk performance has been poor because of the number of leisure centres we have and the relatively low usage we have for each of them. But our position there further declined in this current year because in a number of other councils, these centres were used for COVID. For COVID testing or other facilities, so lots of people went in. So there's an example of where COVID specifically disrupted a particular indicator, and because some councils were using sports centres in order to deal with COVID, their numbers went up, and because we weren't doing that, our position relatively declined. So as I say, I think the real understanding of that lies in different service areas and different indicators. That's just one example where COVID has had a particular impact in Falkirk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Provost Bissett? Thank you. Next question, we've got a question from Councillor Meiklejohn.
Thank you, convener. What I was going to ask Mr. Laurie's actually just answered in relation to the costs around the leisure services and visits to museums, etc. However, what is going to be more important is what we then do with this information and take that into any improvement plan going forward in order to be able to actually improve on some of our indicators. But I think that there's an awful lot in here that can be positive if we look at particularly around our children and attainment, where there has been significant progress made. However, we should not sit back on our laurels and pat ourselves on the back. We should be looking to make sure we continue to maintain that and to look to improve on that and going forward. But I think that's where we need to take a bit of cognizance from is what we're going to do about where we're not performing in order that we can actually achieve better and look at where we can stretch ourselves with those that we are actually achieving. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Meiklejohn. That was a really good point. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, convener. Again, page 15, 6.4, 50%, 44 of the indicators perform better than the Scottish average. What lessons have been learned from this?
Again, Mr. Laurie, could you answer that question?
Thank you. I mean, in terms of learning, we learn about improvement and the actions we need to take and how we change services in relation to individual indicators. So I suppose just to pick up on the one the leader mentioned, I touched on previously, some of these leisure indicators. So we know that our costs are high per visit compared to other councils. Well, I mean, that tells us something quite basic in a way about our position in terms of the number of buildings we have, the quality of the services we provide, and therefore their ability to attract members of the public. And we know, for example, that some other councils have made significant strides in terms of their leisure estate, investing in it, rationalising it, and that has had a very positive impact on these indicators. And because we regard these as important measures, these ones are going to sit within our council plan, because it's a clear area where we need to improve. Having said that, and just to touch on the issue of attainment, so in attainment our performance is very high. We're in the top quartile for most of these measures, but we'll also be putting these in the corporate plan, because we recognise that in terms of prospects for our young people, that educational attainment is fundamental to their future life chances. So these are also going to be in the council plan, because we recognise that for all of the good performance we have, that has to be a continuing area of focus. So what lies behind this is that for many of these indicators, there is a network of officers working that area of service who liaise on a national basis, learn from each other, find out who's performing best, and try and replicate that performance. And I think that as a council, Falkirk at this stage is very engaged in that national improvement work. So as I say, I think for us, the important thing through the council plan is identify which of the indicators are really important to us and where we want to improve performance, whether they're in the top quartile or whether they're in the bottom quartile, and then ensure that our efforts are in driving forward performance in these areas. And indeed, in terms of our best value review, and Rebecca mentioned this earlier, what the Accounts Commission do not expect us to do is just try and improve all indicators, because they realise that our resources will not stretch to that. What they expect us to do is have a very clear sense of which ones are important to us and focus on improving these indicators. And that's our approach across the piece. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, was that helpful and informative for you?
Yes, it was very informative. Thank you.
Councillor Forrest, you have a question, please?
Yes, thanks. Let's see, I lost it there. Page 16, 6.6. Could we have clarity on what is meant by SCHN1, the cost per primary school pupil in pounds? Thank you.
Mr. Naylor, did you hear that question? Could you answer that, please?
You're on mute, Mr. Naylor.
Thank you. The cost per primary school pupil is a measure whereby there's a calculation done on our expenditure in the primary sector in total, divided by the number of primary school pupils that we have, and that is done similarly across the other 31 local authorities, and then they're ranked in order. So this particular indicator shows that our primary school delivery is very efficient.
Did that clarify, Councillor Forrest, for you?
Could you be just a little bit more specific in what costs there are per child, is including, I take it it's the hardware of providing the service, such as the schools, the equipment, as opposed to wages, etc. Could you just do a wee breakdown for there?
It's the total expenditure, so it does include the wages of teachers, of support staff, of catering and cleaning staff, of the cost of the building, of the heating, of the lighting, the cost of the central team, proportionately allocated to the primary sector. The cost, for example, of educational psychology services and other support services that work within the primary sector. So it's a measure of the totality of our expenditure on primary schooling.
That's grand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer, Mr Naylor. I have another question from Councillor Nico John, please.
Apologies, convener, that was a legacy, but it's just to say that the noise from the town hall room is very, very difficult. I don't know whether it's your microphone, convener, that's causing a lot of feedback, but it's making it quite difficult to hear.
Yeah, I only turn it on when I speak, so I'm not sure the problem. It's something maybe we can look at, actually. Any more questions? Councillor Robertson.
Convener, again, page 16, 6.5. With 14 indicators being placed in the bottom 8 of councils in Scotland, would external communication with councils who perform better be possible? Do we measure performance differently in other councils?
Mr Laurie, are you able to answer that question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. No, the consistency in measurement is very high. So it's not that we're measuring these indicators differently from others. And I mentioned earlier the work that's done in kind of officer groups to compare and contrast performance. And so certainly there are mechanisms and opportunities to learn from other councils who might be performing better than us on these indicators. That we find they're set out at 6.7. The indicators that sit within the bottom quartile. Some of these we've touched on already in terms of sport and leisure and cultural facilities, but there are a range there, and we are, for those that are significant to us, we will be working with other councils to try and improve our performance and get higher up the LGBF table.
Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Laurie. Next question, we have another question from Councillor Aitchison, please.
Thanks, convener. It's page 28, the appendix 1. It's regarding the percentage of the highest paid 5% employees who are women. This figure has remained unchanged through 2018-2021. Could we maybe find out what has been done to address this situation and to encourage more women into these positions, please?
Karen, are you able to answer this question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. It's a good question, councillor, and it's a figure where you try and at least get around the 50% mark, and that is indeed where we are, because what we don't want to have is an imbalance of females, which this figure is actually intended to measure, but equally you don't want an imbalance where you have a very small number of males and no female and too many females, so that could swap it the other way. So we have fairly consistently been sitting around that 50% mark, and I was just looking at the figures for this year up to date, and we are still sitting around 53% female and 46% male. Much of this is dependent on recruitment practices. We can't simply go out and recruit females, but we can make sure that our recruitment practices are gender neutral and that we are as fair as possible following all of the equality legislation in terms of those practices, and that we make sure things like our adverts are open, they're transparent, and they are gender neutral as well, because what you don't want to do is deter females or males or ethnic minorities. So it's about getting that real balance right across the equality spectrum for that particular figure. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree, Karen. It was a very thorough answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. And I just want to mention at this point where I'm sure all the councillors and all the staff are delighted that yourself and Amanda have been appointed as chief officers to this year, which is excellent. Thank you. Another question now for Laura Murtagh. Councillor Murtagh, please, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just picking up, and partly the Chief Executive kind of answered part of this earlier, and there's been some discussion about the consistency rates and about the measurement, and particularly note that the Chief Executive's answer about reassuring that actually there is already a lot of work that goes into understanding how councils are reporting each of these metrics to try and get that consistent position, and therefore you know, the thing which would kind of lead to concern would be when we're in more the kind of quartile, the bottom quartiles of that, and if they are indeed consistent. I suppose it just reading through the report in certain metrics that, and we touched already on the kind of situation of sport and leisure, and perhaps how different councils have been reporting the visits differently, or online visits, or counting different things, and that's an example where maybe there was a bit of variance, and that could have then put us further down the ranking in that particular metric, where if we'd been counting it the same way, we would be further up. And I know that obviously within the service which I'm portfolio holder for sport and leisure, certainly exploring with officers how we can understand that better rather than just anecdotally note it, how we can actually look and say, well, how are we sure about that? And therefore, when we're looking at improvements, where can we actually target for that? So I suppose my question is really about some of those other metrics. If we are actually more confident that they are consistently being applied, that then we're looking at, right, okay, the quartile where we're much further down, and specifically analysing in each service with the other councils then where there are improvements, so we can get some more quality data out of what those mean. Because I'm not sure, sometimes in the report it does actually say that we don't think that the measurement is like for like, as Councillor Binney was saying, apples with apples or apples with oranges. So it's just to sort of balance out, it's not a contradiction in what was being said, but just there are a few concerns then that, how we're approaching that, if we're approaching it across the board of looking at that analysis where we are kind of in the lower quartiles and where we've obviously dipped, so that we can get better analysis rather than just a sort of anecdotal within the report that we think, that it's to do with COVID, or we think it's to do with the way that it's been reported. Can we get some assurance that there's some analysis on each of those, please?
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. That was a very good question. Mr. Lorry, can you answer that, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'll certainly endeavour to do so. I mean, there is a huge amount of detail that underlies all of this. Rebecca mentioned at the beginning, you can go on to through the improvement service, get all of that information for all councils, and indeed look back over the full now 11 years of the local government benchmarking framework and see how performance has changed over that period. So, I mean, there were specifically, just to come back to the point, there were some inconsistencies round about COVID, but I think in a way that was my view of it, more inconsistencies of a approach to the utilisation of facilities rather than inconsistencies in measurement. Though there may be some of the latter as well, because just because I suppose the sheer disruptive impact of COVID on so many services, and indeed in some cases on the ability to devote resources to issues such as performance, when actually the frontline matters were obviously of overwhelming importance. So whilst we have an 11-year time series now for the majority of these indicators, though some of them, such as climate change, are newer, across a whole range of them, including attainment, you do see a significant shifts and changes in the last two periods. And I think retrospectively, and the point was made earlier in the meeting, things are going to settle down a bit. I think 21-22 will also be a year where there's some variances and unpredictabilities in the data as a result of COVID, and then we'll settle back, we hope, into a rather more normal pattern. But what I would say is that for any indicator where our performance is relatively poor and where we think it's important to improve that performance because it is a priority for us, there is both a lot of data and a network that we can tap into that to help us improve what we're doing and move forward on that basis. Thank you.
Does that answer it, Councillor Murtagh, for you?
It does, and particularly the last part. Sorry, there's still that echo. Councillor Binney, could you turn? Thank you. Sorry, it's a complicated echo system there. That last part does answer it in particular, but I think it's perhaps from previous experience, and I previously sat on Scrutiny Committee and remember this report coming forward and perhaps analysed it more than I should have, but it gave me a real insight into, for example, at that time we were sitting 32 out of 32 on the cost per planning application, and I think more than double probably even the person at 31. But actually what was uncovered through that scrutiny process in that report was indeed the way that we were reporting it, and also in comparison to similar local authorities. You know, we're not necessarily going to compare with you know, the planning situation in rural Highland or etc. So then understanding actually we were not comparing apples with apples in that situation, and I take the point that a lot of work has been done over the last 5 years to improve the consistency of reporting, but I think that exercise said to me that where there were, particularly where we're sitting in the bottom quartile and we're able to then look at that data, was a useful exercise in making that improvement, which we were able to do on that particular metric. So it's just that last reassurance the Chief Executive gave is important, but definitely I think it's useful for us, particularly where we're in that red or triple amber, to be able to look at that and make sure.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. We have.
It's page 29, code SHSN5. The percentage of on the percentage of council houses that are energy efficient. What does energy efficient make reference to? Are heating systems included in this? And although we are doing better than the Scottish average, what measures are being taken to improve the figure further?
Karen, are you able to answer this question? Thank you.
I am, convener, thank you. The figure relates to all different methods of work that we're doing to look at energy efficiency. So it does include heating, but we look at a range of different things, and we're looking at different measures such as our heating systems, but also things such as the new windows and doors contract that we've got out about replacing new windows and doors, which clearly helps with energy efficiency, and also things like rendering houses, which is about upgrading how those houses can retain heat. So all of these factors play into that, and it's something that we actively work on. Thank you.
Your question, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Another question now from Councillor Forrest, please.
Yeah, again, this one will probably be for Mr. Naylor. It's page 222, SCHN3, and it's, while I noticed that the cost of the preschool places in 2018-19 were £5,517.92, just a couple of years later, in 2021, this cost had risen to quite a considerable £9,426.68. Over those years indicated, that's a rise of £3,908.76. First of all, the Scotland value was £9,254.90. Now, I take it that this was due to the expansion of the nursery provision within Falkirk. Can I ask, was there any financial assistance given to Falkirk from the Scottish Government to offset this increase in costs and increase the investment in our children's future?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor, the the increase in cost is entirely associated with a move towards a 1,140 hours entitlement for every preschool child. The expansion of early years was funded entirely by the Scottish Government through ring-fence funding. It continues to be ring-fence funding, and we expect that that will be the case for at least one more year. But the jump that you've noticed from 6,800 to 9,400 is to do with that expansion from what was 600 hours provision up to 1,140 hours provision over the course of a 2 to 3 year period of implementation.
That's lovely, thank you very much. And as I asked earlier, there was funding from the Scottish Government to offset the costs.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question now from Councillor Spears, please.
No, you have no question from me. My hand's not up.
I beg your pardon, sorry. Another question from Councillor Aitchison, please.
Thanks, Convener. It's two questions regarding the housing, and it's page 9 on Appendix 1. It's SHS N2 and SHS N4B. The council rent that has been lost due to houses remaining empty has risen from 1.04% to 1.58%, and I would suggest this is money that the council could ill afford to lose. What's been done to remedy that situation, and also the average time taken to complete non-emergency repairs has virtually doubled over the last couple of years, and it's near enough double the national thing as well. So again, what's been done to try and solve those issues?
Thank you, Councillor Aitchison. Karen, is that a question you could answer? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Convener. On the first question around rent arrears, you will see in some of the text that's in the report that some of that has been impacted by the way that we worked with tenants to collect rent arrears, and that was all done face to face. So a lot of that will have been impacted by COVID. We've looked at how we can change some of that, but we're also working quite hard on those particular factors. So that work is in hand. On the housing repairs question, yeah, it's disappointing to see those figures, but I think it'd be beneficial for me to highlight to members, particularly the new members to the committee, that in previous years our performance was fairly good on the repairs, but for non-emergency repairs. Over the period of the pandemic, however, and some of this is in the report, you will know that we had a number of restrictions in the way that we could run the repair service. So we could not carry out the repairs to the full extent that we were able to pre the pandemic. We had restrictions such as the number of people that could be in houses, the way they could work, social distancing, etc. At that point, we focused very much on emergency repairs to make sure that the safety of tenants was the priority, but also focused on things like our statutory requirements, such as homelessness, and trying to ensure that we got houses ready for anyone that was homeless in that period. As a result, we did have a backlog of somewhere in the region of over 7,000 outstanding jobs. Now, what I would say is that some councils simply told their tenants they couldn't do those jobs and took them off the system. We kept all of those requests for work on our system, and we've continued now to work through them. So of those 7,000 jobs, we have only around 400 that remain to be completed. So we have done a huge amount of work since the figures that you've got in the report were reported. There's been a huge amount of work done to get through that backlog, and we're hoping that by next month that backlog will have been sorted, and we should see as we move forward an improvement in the figures, and I hope that helps to answer the question.
The first part of my question was actually about houses remaining empty, not about rent arrears. It's money that's being lost through empty housing. And the second part, I totally appreciate your answer, but the regulations would have been the same for all local authorities. So for Falkirk to have become, the figures are twice what it was in 18-19 is really disappointing.
Convener, happy to come back in on those points. On the second part, absolutely, I agree that those are not the figures we would want to see, but hopefully the fact that we've now worked through those has given you the assurance that we have taken a lot of action to put steps in place to address that situation. You're absolutely right, the guidance, the national guidance was absolutely the same for all local authorities, and we have stuck to that rigidly. Now we know that there are some situations where what the regulations required us to do was to keep those requests for repairs on the system, but we do know that in some councils that may not have been the case. Now, I think what's important here is that we are getting through that backlog and that we're actually taking positive actions to address that. On the first question about void properties, we have put in place some additional arrangements and additional contracts to try and help us address the situation with void properties, and I'm happy to get you more information on that, Councillor, if that would be of help.
Thanks, Karen, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Just on that point, I was just going to say that's really good that we're just maybe a month away from catching up with the backlog of the non-emergency. That's really good to hear. Thank you. Has anybody got any more questions at this point? Provost Bissett, I believe you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Page 25, Appendix 1, SC and L1 in plan, cost per attendance of sport and leisure facilities, including swimming pools. There is a considerable increase compared to 2019-20, the 2019-20 value, as well as a significant gap between our value, £81.44, compared to the Scottish value of £40.36. Have any improvement plans been implemented to improve this, as we are still above the national average prior to the pandemic?
Thank you, Provost Bissett. Mr. Naylor, are you able to answer this? Thank you.
Yep. Yes, Convener. Councillor Bissett, the figure, as you say, was high even before the pandemic. The pandemic clearly didn't help the situation. Fundamentally, the issue here is that we have arguably over-provision of swimming pools and facilities in the Falkirk area. Many other councils have only swimming pools that are public swimming pools. They don't have swimming pools in every town as we do. So one of the things that we will be looking to do now that the Trust has returned to the Council and Sport and Leisure sits within Children's Services is we will be looking at the totality of that provision, where it exists and what our opening hours are, because it is an area where there's significant improvement needed in terms of the cost per visit.
Does that answer your question, Provost Bissett?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Forrest, please.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, one more question for Mr. Naylor, if you don't mind. It's just something leading on from page 22.2, SCHN3 again. So sorry about this. The cost of each preschool place in Falkirk is £1,701.78p above the Scottish value of the 2021 figure. Could you explain the difference, please?
The difference is attributed to the fact that we include within that calculation expenditure on all children in the pre-5 setting, and what we have had for many years is baby provision, where we have 2 centres where we have children from 0 to 2. The costs of that service are significant. It's a cost that very, very few councils have, but it is included in our figures, and we have on this particular metric been more costly than the Scottish average for many years, but that's the reason for it.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor, and very worthwhile too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest. I have a question, Mr. Naylor. I just want to come back in, if you don't mind. I'm a keen swimmer, you see. You mentioned there's over provision of swimming pools in leisure. So you said you were going to look at that. Can you give us a time scale when you'll come back and give us a report on that, please? And that be obviously linked to the strategic property review. And I'm sure a lot of people in our communities would be interested in that as well, actually, and how it impacts every ward.
Thank you, Convener. No concrete proposals as yet. What I can confirm, though, is that we are looking at the various places that we have swimming pools. We're looking at which sessions are best attended. We're looking at what the income is that we get from having swimming pools open, and we're also doing some early benchmarking with other council areas in terms of what their provision is across their council areas. So when I said this is something that we're looking at, that is the stage that we are at, and there will be proposals forthcoming to improve this measure in the next months.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. Councillor Spears, I believe, has got a question. His hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I much appreciated your interjection there. A very relevant question. I would hate the message to go out from Mr. Naylor that there could be some cutback in our leisure facilities because he feels there's over provision. Benchmarking with other councils is all very well, but we're here to provide a service for the people here in Falkirk District, and that's right across the district. So I hope we're not talking about any closures of swimming pools here.
Mr. Naylor, could you come in there? Is that something you're still looking at? So I take it, I'm not going to answer your question.
Any closure of swimming pools will be a decision taken by Falkirk Council.
Is that
scrutiny meeting here ascertain of what our executive, our education leader is telling us. So I'm asking you again, are you telling us that swimming pools could close?
Swimming pools could close. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Provost Bissett, I believe you've got a question. Thank you.
Thanks for your indulgence. Aye. So my final question, page 22, Appendix 1, SC and L2 in the plan, cost per visit to libraries. There's a considerable increase compared to 2019-20, the 2019-20 value, as well as a significant gap between our value, £24.79, compared to the Scottish value of £2.88 per visit. What mechanisms are in place to increase footfall again, and what plans are in place to reduce the costs, considering we were above the national average prior to the pandemic? Now, I know Mr. Gillespie and his team are doing an awful lot of work in that, but given that this meeting's live streamed, I think I would just like the public to hear an answer of what we're planning to do with libraries. Thank you.
Is that yourself, Karen? A good answer. Thank you.
It is, Convener, thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question, Councillor Bissett, and we were very conscious of the LGBF indicators when we saw these about the need to actively look at the library activities and make sure that we were proactive in terms of responding to these figures. So what we are in the process of doing is pulling together a range of actions which will come to Falkirk Council on 28th of September for consideration, and part of that will be about developing a 5-year plan for libraries to try and address some of those issues. It's fair to say that there's still, with that, there's still a lot of work going on in libraries to encourage footfall, and things like the inclusion of the hub within libraries has been a positive addition, which also gives residents the ability to come into libraries, but to as well as visitor hubs, but to also get support for other things when they're actually in there. So it's how we can maximise the use of libraries through other service introductions as well, and we're looking at all of those things. Thanks.
Does that answer it, Provost Bissett, for you?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest, a question?
Good. One last question from me, if you don't mind. It's page 32, Tackling Climate Change, SCLIM01. The CO2 emissions area-wide per capita in 2018-19 were 14.76%. I gradually went down in the following year and went down slightly more in the following year of 2021, down to 13.28. Well, the benchmark of the Scotland value is 4.62%. While I note that this is being monitored and it is being reduced slowly and gradually, I note that even in the lowest figure of 2021, it's still almost 3 times the Scottish value. Can we find out, please, what the reason for this high figure is in comparison to the Scottish value, the impact on the local communities, and any measures that are being undertaken, you know, to try and resolve this, because this is really quite important. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Forrest. I'd like Mr. Bennett to come in. Could you maybe give us some more information regarding the question? Thank you.
Thank you, convener. That particular indicator reflects Falkirk as an area, and elected members will be aware that Falkirk contains Grangemouth, which is one of Scotland's largest hubs for industry and biggest emitters of carbon. So I think that's just a natural reflection of the landscape that we have in front of us. Obviously, INEOS and other companies have made commitments about moving to a carbon reduction model, and we'll see benefits as they come forward. But I think probably the more relevant PI in terms of what we can actually control is the one below that, with regard to emissions within the scope of the local authority, and you'll see that on that basis we're performing much better.
The other part of the question was what measures are being undertaken to try and resolve this? Are we in constant talks with the perpetrators of this?
I think, with the greatest respect, through you, convener, we don't have a kind of locus to dictate terms to businesses in our local area, but you know, I'm pleased that major local employers and businesses are making public commitments to transition to greener energy. So I don't believe we're in a place where we need to. I think we should welcome those announcements and look forward with interest to see how they progress.
Councillor Forrest, does that answer your question?
Well, as far as it goes, yes, but obviously this is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, yes, and would appreciate a report back at a later time.
And on that point, Mr. Benny, I totally agree with you how important NAS is in Grangemouth for the benefit of everybody in our communities and that. But I think it might be helpful, you know, as councillors, if we could find out the steps that NAS is taking, not that we wish to interfere, because you said that they're a private company and it is beneficial for our area to have that company there. So even just sort of finding out the steps they're taking, just a little bit more understanding, because I realise it's very, very technical, but I really think that would be helpful. So is that possible, maybe, to get some of that information and share with the councillors, because it's one of the biggest employers in the area, and obviously it's got the biggest impact to our CO2 emissions, and whether we control that or not is helpful as a community to understand, you know, what they are doing. Is that a helpful, Councillor Forrest?
Absolutely, Convener, thank you.
Yes, thank you, not at all.
Yeah, through you, Convener. Very happy to ask my economic development colleagues to prepare a briefing that updates on the commitments of INEOS and other large private businesses in the Grangemouth area and across Falkirk in terms of commitments, and I'll get that to all elected members.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Do we have, I've got Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. One final question, thanks. Page 29, SECON2, cost per planning application. Why, if planning application numbers fall, does it get more expensive?
Mr. Benny, you could come in there. Would that be possible? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Convener. I'll get more information on this, but often sometimes applications of a more significant nature, larger in scale, can generate greater fees. And if you don't have those coming through, then the overall income that the service receives goes down. So it's not as easy as just to say, is it like per number of applications is the scale. But let me get more information on that for you. I'm happy to share that with the Scrutiny Committee as well.
Does that help, Councillor Roberts?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Benny. Thank you.
I'm now nearly at the end, and I must admit it's been a really engaging question and answer, and I've got to thank all the members and all the officers as well for participating. So I'm just going to come in here and say, has anybody got any more questions before we finish up? Sorry. The recommendations, sorry, I forgot about the important part. Yes, Mr. Peary will do the next part, thank you.
Sorry, that wasn't very elegant. So the committee were asked to note the report and scrutinise the council's performance, and they were scrutinising with a view to seeing if there was any reports they wanted to bring forward, which would possibly feed into their recommendations to the council plan. Don't think the committee's actually asked for reports. I note there was a couple of briefing reports coming back, Mr. Benny just referred to just towards the end, and I think the committee also noted that council will look at its council plan and develop its framework of indicators that it determines are the priority ones, and I think Rebecca said at the start that these will be reported to the Scrutiny Committee. So perhaps today it's just to note the report and be aware that there'll be future reports coming on key performance indicators, and that's where the Scrutiny Committee might want to delve deeper into reports. But for just now, it's just noting the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peary. And again, I want to thank all the members and all the officers for participating in the Scrutiny Committee today. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Well done, Convener.